Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is our 15th edition of the Burning Issues. This is an edition that we do every last Wednesday of the month, but because we've had many shows, we've actually not had this for quite a while, so we're excited to be here. And Burning Issues is we discuss issues that you, the viewers, put forward to us in terms of issues that are really worth considering to have discussed on the show. And tonight we're going to talk about a couple of issues. The first, of course, is to do with presidential elections that are happening all over the world. In the US, we had one concluded in Tanzania. We have upcoming ones in Nigeria, in Somalia, and so forth and so on, so across the continent as well. Very importantly, we're also going to touch on the reopening of schools, students going back to school, as well as the issue of the drafting or recruitment exercise of teachers by the Rwanda Education Board. These are some of the issues we're going to talk about, as well as your interventions on our social media channels. My name is Denan PC, host of The Square. As always, I'm joined by the Square resident panelists who were not here last week. I was alone. You both left me here with our guests last week, which was fantastic, but it's always great to have you back on the show. Berna Namata, great to have you back again.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana.
Charles, great to have you on the show.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Yes. So before we kick off, we usually have midweek highlights, things you'd like to touch on that are not really part of the topic tonight. Is there anything you'd like to touch on, Charles?
Two things. One on a very, very light note. Uganda has had presidential nominations. We'll probably touch on it in the show because of I'm not too happy that as the owner of the show, you chose me to wear red. And you conveniently chose yellow. I'm not sure that's the same reason for which Bana is wearing blue.
But yellow.
That's on a light note, but I'm very, very happy for RBA, and not because it's a studio in which we are seated, but I read something yesterday in the media that, to the effect that RBA had signed exclusive broadcasting rights for the Football League. And I have been reliably informed that even by virtue of the fact, even before it comes out in the public, by virtue of the fact of riding on the piggy bank of what they have done with the Football Federation, they want the other sports bodies to come in. Now, the Rwanda Broadcasting Federation has invested extremely heavily in infrastructure, but all sports bodies, and I'm speaking as a former sports administrator, sports bodies struggle so much with broadcasting rights. It's usually very unheard of for a state broadcaster to invest in the technology that's required, and that's why broadcasting rights are very exorbitant, either for the advertisers or for the sponsors, or even that the sports bodies end up with peanuts. But when a state broadcaster invests in the technology, the direct impact is that the national bodies directly benefit. So I think it's a move in the right direction. I'm not aware of the details of the revenue share in the deals that will be there, but I'm sure because RBA's ultimate objective is promotion. It's not necessarily a profit, which unlike maybe Teledis or Azam or all those things, as a government actor, you have a bigger picture in mind. So I am hoping that RBA will have the bigger picture in mind and not bite the sports bodies, but rather get some of the revenue they get from broadcasting rights to grow the sports bodies. I think I'm very excited to see how that will work out. I think it's a step in the right direction. Yeah. Yes.
Very interesting. Brenna, any midweek highlights you'd like to share?
Yes. I've been reflecting on the COVID situation around the world. We must thank our frontline workers who've managed to contain COVID. Because if you look at what's happening around us, the second wave, some economies shutting down, going back into lockdown.
I know the UK is going back into lockdown tomorrow.
I think we shouldn't take it for granted. There are people who have had sleepless nights over the last 6 months or so, trying to ensure that we are safe. We have children now going back to school. So that's something to be really, really grateful for. And I hope that beyond the clap that was given to frontline workers, we'll find a way of really thanking them in a meaningful way. And part of that is continuing to observe the guidelines so that they don't have to do more work. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you very much to our viewers for tuning in. Thank you for your tweets that have been coming in. And we're just going to start by reading a couple of tweets before we kick off the show. The first tweet we have, if we could have it on our screens, is from Frank Chigenza, who states that ahead of the show, he tweeted that perhaps a special focus on education. And he says schools reopening, yet private universities with schools shutting doors on short notice and snubbing students with nasty letters, parents or carers struggling with school experiences. He also says that the dismissal of Rwanda Education Board officials was somewhat shrouded. That's the first tweet that we have for today, and we're going to touch on some of the topics that he mentioned. Our other tweet comes from Rehma. Karera Rehma states that following the recent pregnancy test requirements saga in some schools, a topic on raising or educating the girl child in a feminist era would be interesting. How do parents and educators strike the balance? So thank you to Rehma and to Frank. We'll be reading more of your social media interventions later on in the show. So the first, of course, is to do with schools reopening. You know that this week, November the 2nd, Monday, a lot of schools reopened, especially public schools. But of course, these were to do with guidelines that were given by the Ministry of Education. Strict guidelines to be adhered to regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, such as social distancing, washing stations in school, wearing masks, and so forth and so on. But the very general question to kick off the show to you, Charles and Brenna, is to what's your take on how schools can best really ensure the safety of students going back to school amidst this pandemic? And Charles, I'll start with you, and just generally speaking before we get into the meat of this topic.
When I dropped my daughter in school on Monday, I was very, very curious to see what measures they had in place. The first thing that took me by surprise was they didn't allow me to go beyond a certain point, which under normal circumstances I could go straight up to my daughter's school. Which, I mean, as a parent, you're a bit surprised. Please remember they've just moved to a new class. Well, they moved to a new class while they were in lockdown. So, yeah, they were promoted, and so I wanted to see where the new class is and what have you. They said, no. Because of SOPs, you can't go beyond this point. That's one, so I was impressed. The second one was really around the SOPs. It didn't take me too much by surprise because we've been going through the same at home when you're going through public places, whether it's a restaurant or whatever. But the more organized schools will have more organized setups, hand washing stations, and what have you. So again, the second double blue ticks. However, that said, I was a little bit bothered because naturally, because of social distancing, the numbers have to be controlled. Yet, the school fees do not reflect the numbers being controlled. So it's painful, and just when I thought we could complain as parents of a particular school, I realized you also have to bear the teachers in mind, and as a business person, I'll have to understand the schools that are run as a business. But it's a little bit painful that you're paying full fees for half the service, half or if sometimes not even half. But again, you cannot equate money to health. So it's a bit of a dilemma, and we've throughout all the squares we've had since March 19th or thereabout, we've always had touching topics around
The pandemic.
around the pandemic, Diana. So it's unfortunate. It's something that that we have to do with, but it's painful as a parent that you have to bear the brunt of paying full fees and not getting the full value from the school.
Yeah. But like you said, I think the top line is health over issues like that. These are financial constraints that have been brought by the pandemic for everyone.
Yeah.
And you'd rather have your kids safe and your family safe than otherwise. Brenna, any insights to give on how schools can best manage student safety while this pandemic is still raging?
I think, first of all, it was good to see that many parents were excited to have their children.
I think many parents were relieved as well.
Yeah, relieved actually is the word,
Yeah.
to have their children go back to school. And yes, many are frustrated that children may spend less hours at school. But I think we need to think about the entrepreneurs that have invested for the private sector, the entrepreneurs that run these schools. You've been closed for 6 months or so. Before reopening, they had to find the money to fund the safety, ensuring that the school environment is safe. So it's not business as usual, even for the teachers. So you can understand that it's quite a delicate balance, even for government, because I've seen some reaction as to why public schools, not all public schools are open.
My understanding is that it has to be done in phases.
Yes, yes. One phased because, of course, you're trying to ensure that there is safety, because what we've seen again around the world is that when the schools open, there's a bit of a spike in numbers. So how you manage that, I think, will be important. But also, running, especially public schools, requires money. Now, as we know, the government has been pumping money across, trying to get the economy, restarting the economy again. You can imagine how much they spent on the testing. That was for free for a very long time. So even having the schools open, it requires some money, and that money has to come from somewhere. I feel that there's room for us to be patient and pay attention to the reality of the situation. If you're dealing with the pandemic, first of all, you're learning on the job, and you have to be really cautious because you don't want to reverse the gains, especially in terms of safety, like we have seen those who rushed through the process. Today, we had Kenya almost go back into a lockdown. President Uhuru was quite frustrated, anybody who listened to his remarks. So it's quite difficult. So it will require a lot of patience and understanding on both sides, because yes, everybody's tired. It's 7 months. You need children to go back to school. You need to have your life back, but it's a pandemic. So it's difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I throw a comment? Sorry.
But just very quickly, I think, just before I come to you, I think you also kind of answer Frank Chiganza's query on Twitter, saying that, what about schools? Some of them are been shut down, with rude letters and so forth and so on. But I think ideally what we need to understand, it's a phased approach. Not all schools are reopening at the same time, and this is for specific reasons of managing the pandemic. Charles?
Yeah, I want to mention maybe 2 or 3 things. Number one is, in reaction to what Bana says, is the balancing act, and I don't want to be in the shoes of the Minister of Education and everyone else across the board, because, again, I'm sure we'll talk about this as the show progresses. It's very, very difficult to manage a pandemic irrespective of the institution that you lead. Even if you lead Blue Oceans, you're managing a pandemic, you have to give us, and you have to deliver the show exactly. During a pandemic. It's extremely tough. Now imagine a school where kids have been promoted because they have been taught by teachers they cannot see, which teachers have to be paid, and so on and so forth. School materials, and it's a hellwire of a situation. But that said, you see, when and I'll give probably my own live experience as a parent, and one of the biggest challenges I have faced is it feels sometimes that I never went through P5. and that's the specific point I wanted to raise about Bana and the challenges of parents going homeschooling and what have you. So the program has been going on. Kids are being taught. They have to sit exams, and they have to pass exams and then get promoted. Can you imagine those who do not have the fortune of parents who went to school? But even better still, even us who had the fortune of going to school, you'll be challenged. And Dan, if I asked you what photosynthesis is, you'd struggle, but you probably do well because you have a smartphone, right? Yeah. So the challenges of it, and at the same time, you have to go back to work to pay school fees for the online studying. So I mean, it is immaterial for us to go through this because we've said this before on the Square. But it's a very big relief, as Bana was saying, for parents where the kids are at school. So those who can afford, it's fantastic. But the biggest issue now that we're having is teachers. Teachers had to survive, and they found other ways of survival. It's extremely unfortunate that, and then when you live in an urban setting, you'll take things for granted. That somebody in the rural areas will wake up probably in the morning and realize there's more money in selling tomatoes or riding a motorbike or doing bicycle taxi than offering education as a service. I am hoping that offering education as a service is now going to be better appreciated as opposed to a teaching job. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So I think COVID, that's one of the positives of COVID that we've spoken about on the show, that we keep whining and saying, COVID has been extremely bad to us, but one of the positives of COVID is that we're going to start appreciating people like teachers. Yeah, absolutely.
And now that you preempted, the next part of the topic is to do with the recruitment of teachers. So we saw beginning of last week the dismissal of top officials from the Rwanda Education Board. And this was a statement from the Prime Minister's office, and that said that the specific reason for this was because of a failed teacher recruitment exercise. Now, before November 2nd, there was supposed to be a specific number of teachers already recruited, ready to roll in with the program of reopening schools. This was not done. There was a huge significant number between the amount of teachers that had been recruited vis-a-vis the teachers that were expected to have been recruited by the beginning of this week, November 2nd, when schools reopened. Now, against this backdrop, Charlton Berner, what is your take? We have students going back to school against the backdrop of teachers who are more or less not at the capacity that they should be. When we were rolling out, when the REB, was rolling out this program, and we had the Director General of REB on the show a couple of months back, if you remember, who kind of explained that there was a recruitment exercise, there were exams that were given for teachers sometime middle of this year, I think in July, and that was done again because that was carried out badly. So no specific reasons have been given. We're just speculating as to specifically what the Prime Minister's office statement meant, but right now there's a failed teacher recruitment exercise and kids are going back to school. What's your take on this? What solutions do you offer on how to manage such a challenge like this that is recurring? It's a recurring challenges like this are recurring to the Ministry of Education, Rwanda Examination Board. Brenna, I'll kick off with you.
I think that we should start by asking ourselves if we should believe the reports from the Ministry of Education.
Okay.
Because before the Prime Minister's statement, they were saying they were ready.
True.
Okay? There was a huge press conference, the Minister of Education was there, and they were saying they were ready. So, who was telling the truth? Unfortunately, we don't get the detail from the Prime Minister's statement.
Of course not. Yeah.
And we've been trying to follow up and find out what really happened, and it's not yet clear beyond the statement. I think there was a report by the Public Service Commission that highlighted some of those challenges, but I think it's bigger than that. When you see something like that, I mean, children are going back to school. Schools are about teachers, yeah? So if you're saying the teachers are not there, then there's a bigger problem. You wonder whether the ministry has actually done the other work that needs to be done. It's like you're going to a hospital and there are no doctors.
That's essentially what it sounds like.
Yes.
At the
So
moment.
it's quite unfortunate. It's difficult to know whether it's entirely the problem of the officials involved who've been suspended. But I think it points to the bigger problem with the Ministry of Education and what we continue to see with our education system. That lack of coordination, proper planning, and unfortunately, children suffer as a result of this kind of confusion within, coordination and implementation, learning outcomes. Because you can imagine if you're going to school, a public school, and as Charles was pointing out, you've paid school fees and someone is not there, or they are not motivated, or they are not of the right mind to teach. So it's quite tough, and if you ask me, it's quite unfortunate, because the education, until we fix education, we'll continue to have many problems.
Absolutely.
Because you fail to fix education, the skills gap will continue.
And it's an entire generation that's affected.
Yes, and it bears, it also undermines our competitiveness as a country. If you don't have the, students or pupils that come out that are competitive, then you have a bigger problem, structural problem. So I don't know. It's quite painful, to be honest. It's painful, but we don't know. But thankfully, we know where the problem is. So hopefully it will get fixed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because out of 7,000 teachers that were supposed to be recruited, around only 4,600 have been recruited. So, less than half you wonder, what are these students, what schools are they going to, what teachers are they going to expect? Charles, what's your take on this?
I haven't met a particular lady, and I hope either Bana or Dana will introduce me to her, to Marie. No, I hope you will introduce me to Marie Immaculée Ingabire of Transparency International. So I was watching a program on TV, and my favorite Rwanda TV program, Imboni, and she says, loosely translated, that whoever bewitched the education sector of Rwanda must have been very good at his job. If you say it in Kinyarwanda, it can sound extremely crude. But she's a lady who does not mince words, but just taking it away from her, by virtue of the fact that you have a high turnover of officials at REB, the Rwanda Education Board, at the ministry level of the Ministry of Education, at the Higher Education Council, it says so much about two things. One, the expectations of the Rwandan populace, and number two, the surmountable job at hand. Now, I personally do not believe it has to do with incompetence of the people who actually get appointed into those jobs, because if they were extremely bad at the job, they would not have gotten appointed in the first place. So I think it's a lot to do with the expectations of the job at hand. That's one thing. The second thing that I think is that when it comes to education, patience levels are very minimal because expectations in terms of results are almost immediate. So if I'm going to be BRD or Ministry of Education or WDA and I put in 100 million francs or 100 million whatever in a project, I will expect that in 2-3 years I am seeing results. It does not necessarily work like that because the entire ecosystem is not fed with the same amount of resources. And I'm going to give you a practical example during COVID.
But wait, Charles,
yes.
I feel like in that statement, I feel there's a level of complacency that you're allowing for in the ministry. You're saying there are high expectations, and therefore if there are high expectations, we should understand
the
some of these
efforts that
expectations
we
are too high for the ministry to deal with. But year in, year out,
yes.
This is a ministry, we've discussed this on the square, we've had ministry of officials coming to explain, but it has been plagued by, incompetencies that sometimes it's really not about high expectations.
So my point, Diana, is that the levels of investment are not equal across the value chain, and the levels of patience are not equal across the value chain. And the value chain will vary from the amount of money we are putting into building classrooms. If you may know, during COVID, throughout COVID, during the lockdown, literally all people who are involved in the construction industry, notably cement suppliers, were told, put all your money there so that we build classrooms. So if we as a country realize that it's extremely important to have hundreds of thousands of square meters of classrooms, why don't we put in the same amount of effort in training quality teachers and retaining them? If the Ministry of Finance realizes it's going to put in billions of francs in the construction industry of classrooms, why doesn't it pump in a significant amount of money in Umwari Musako? So, and then you have to understand that across the entire value chain, if you want results, you have to have an injection you have to have an investment of equal measure if you expect same results.
I really like what you're saying, and not in silos, not in isolation.
Yes.
If you're going to do classrooms, it's common sense to also think of teacher recruitment, teacher training colleges.
Yes. So I think, and I think we will continue having a high turnover. One of the things that you're taught in human resource audit is that if you have a high turnover of the human resource, then there's probably a problem in the way you recruit that human resource. So let's look at both in tandem. But the other thing that I want to really, and I think I've really labored the point on the value chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on equal investment across the value chain. But the other thing is really around expectations. And I hinted on this around COVID. It is not unique to Rwanda. People were rendered redundant during the lockdown, but they had families to feed. Agriculture in this country has been struggling because it's been, I mean, amongst other reasons, but one of the reasons is because it's been left to subsistence farmers who are poorly educated. Now we're going to a lockdown where educated people know that there is no other way but to go and till their farms or their neighbors' farms. Then all of a sudden they wake up in the morning and say, hang on a second, we can actually till our gardens and get money. So theoretically, probably more practically, they have realized that farmers can compete franc for franc with teachers. So where are we going to get the teachers from? If the teachers can make money from digging their gardens.
I think
Yes.
to answer your own question, I think it goes back
Yes,
to these
yes.
available resources,
Yes, yes.
really planning it across the value chain and understanding if you're going to focus on classrooms, please. Common sense also dictates, can we also focus on retaining some
Yes.
of our best talented teachers? Brenna,
Yeah,
before we go to our next...
Yeah, very briefly.
Yeah, topic.
I mean, what Charlie raises is actually more like the software and hardware, you know. So you're
Classrooms
investing...
are hardware, teachers are software.
Yeah, software. So even if you have the hardware, you'd need the software to run, you know, whatever you have. But it will not be reinventing the wheel if we try to find incentives for teachers. Because we know it's happened in other sectors. For instance, the Ministry of Health came up with a scheme to retain doctors and nurses. There's a scheme that is working. Why can't we replicate the same for education? And at what point did we decide that we just prioritize health and not education? You know, because if we think and value education as a cornerstone of sustainable development, then we should be putting in all the required investment. You know, you cannot say you'll just focus on the hard infrastructure and not invest in the software. Secondly, there's a lot of innovation now that allows flexibility, for instance, within the education sector. The days are gone of the typical teacher being, you know, the one who has gone to a teacher's college. You know, we have competent people who may do teaching as part-time. You know, just provide an incentive and call out for, you know, people who are interested in teaching. Because the only thing you need to do is reorient them around how you want the teaching to be done. You know, so it's something that I think if we decide and prioritize education and give it the, you know, they try to make it a priority, it's not difficult to fix, you know, especially if you look at the lower primary, secondary, where we have bigger problems.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
yeah, you have people that would be willing to even volunteer, you know, and teach. So we should be calling out and be proactive, maintain a
and
teachers,
also thinking out of the box, because your solutions are kind of also out of the box.
Come up with a teachers registry, keep it running, open. You know, whenever there's a vacant position, you go to the registry and say, you know, we have so and so. Approach them and ask them. Again, I know, for instance, some of the professional bodies maintain a database of their professionals, and if there's a
vacancy,
yes, it's easy to go to the professional body and they'll get you someone who's qualified. You know, why can't we do that for the teachers instead of waiting for a crisis?
Yeah, I think I'm really, you know, passionate about this issue, you know, to do with education, especially the Ministry of Education. It's I think one of the few ministries that has had a high turnover. You know, in the last decade and a half, if you look at the ministers, the top officials that keep on coming in and out, you know, it just begs the question: are some of these issues caused because of a new, new leadership that changes plans, that plans that don't have longevity. They keep on being changed in a very short time span. I think that's another conversation for another day, but thank you very much for your insights, Charles and Brenna.
Yeah.
And I hope people who need to be listening are listening and just allowing us to give the interventions that we can here on the show. The next topic we want to discuss is to do with presidential elections. There's sort of presidential election frenzy going on across the globe. We have elections taking place in the US. Charles, I asked you earlier on if you're one of those who've been staying up until 3 a.m. watching it. I'll wait for your answer later. We have concluded elections that took place in Tanzania and Ivory Coast, as well as presidential nomination announced for Uganda 2021 elections. In Africa, there are also scheduled presidential, legislative, and parliamentary elections towards the end of the year in Burkina Faso, in Ghana, Central African Republic, Somalia, and Niger. So just on the continent, 10 elections, national elections happening. And my question to you, just, for the last part of this conversation tonight, what is your take on how African presidential elections have panned out in terms of upholding the rule of law and respecting institutions? Brenna, I'll start with you because I know in the media space, your eye is really on the, you have your ear to the ground on these things. Just from an African presidential perspective, and then also if you want to comment on what's happening in the US right now.
First of all, I feel that if we compare on the continent over the last decade, there's hope. We are making progress in terms of having peaceful elections. Small gains, but there is progress. If you look at, if you track, over the last decade. But the problem is, I think increasingly, what we see is the level of tolerance is going down, for the opposition. And the force with which the incumbents respond to the opposition, it's appalling. And if you ask me, it's a shame, because if you're an incumbent, one would imagine that you already have consolidated, your power, your constituency, and as such, you're more confident in your bid, yeah? But when you see the terror on the opposition across the continent, then, and the terror is by people who've been in power for so long, And then you begin to wonder, where are we headed, So that's quite frustrating and appalling to see the response to the opposition or dissenting voices by the incumbent. It's appalling, and I think it has to change, but it will change. It will change because we are seeing increasingly young people getting involved in politics. They have capacity to mobilize, and they understand that you have to fight.
It's not handed over to you.
Yes. Young people really understand that, and when you see how the protests are happening or the response to the force from the incumbents, young people know what they want. Now, the difficulty, I think, again going forward, what we will continue to see is if governments do not give room to at least have some form of negotiation and avoid confrontation, the damage on these countries is going to be worse because you'll find that probably you're spending 6 months fighting protests instead of people actually going to work and doing some meaningful, economic. The security forces should not be known for countering protests instead of, maintaining peace and stability. So it's frustrating what is happening, but again, like I said,
you're optimistic.
I'm optimistic. We are making progress. We are not yet there, but we'll get there. The US election, I'm more interested in the process. I don't understand, you know, but I am more keen on how the process is, you know, how the elections are conducted, the whole process. And I can tell you that despite all their weaknesses in what is happening, it is comforting to see that people are thinking about going to court, you know, and it's not, we are going to fight. Because in the African
surprised there's
there are protests.
Clashes,
yes, you know, there's been talk of protests, yeah. But if we compare back home, how people ordinarily challenge elections, it's a different way. We still have a long way to go. So for the US, I like that even with the, you know, the most absurd statements from, you know, someone you would expect not to say such things, saying them, they have solid institutions that can handle whatever outcome of the elections. We can't say that, you know, in our African setting, that we have independent institutions that can, that citizens will feel will address their concerns. Yeah.
Charles, over to you.
There's a Swahili saying that hiyo ni mambo ya wenyeji, that basically means that domestic affairs are left to the people of the homestead. So loosely translated, that means that the Americans' problems are their problems. The guys of Ivory Coast, the guys of Tanzania, you know, ideally, those are their problems. However, that said, even though ni mambo ya wenyeji, it is their problem, it has a bearing on us because we will need to observe how those people think, because you will have a person coming to power and his opinion on international trade will be totally different at a global level. At a continental level or at a regional level, the first thing he will think of is my predecessor was too close to the regime of my neighbor, and that's the first thing I need to fight. So mambo ya wenyeji is, it becomes more of your problem, of your concern, than it would have otherwise been a distant issue.
Yeah, because we're a globalized world.
Yes, so that's the first point. The second point is when you look at every country having to manage its own affairs in its own way, it becomes more relevant today. And I'll give examples from, I want to take the first one from what Bana said on the relevance of the youth. Today in Rwanda, if you see RPF deliberately saying that if there's a convention or expanded NEC or whatever event that's happening, we are going to involve people in their 30s, it is very, very deliberate. So that you help people put in context why we are quarreling amongst ourselves because of where we are coming from, where we are, and where we want to go. Would the same apply in a country like Ivory Coast, where there's a large section of the people that think it's extremely okay to get an ex-con to come and run for presidency? Definitely not. Would that situation in Ivory Coast apply in Tanzania, where you're in the middle of a pandemic and the president says, hang on a second, I do not care about that pandemic, I have to stay in power?
Yeah.
Definitely not. Would the Tanzanian situation apply in Burundi, where they have lost a president and whose spouse is recovering from COVID and you have a country to rebuild and an institution to rebuild? Definitely not. So I think the point is every country has its own specificities. And I want to talk about the US as well, because that's if we are to rewind our clock and say, even a simple Google search, when was the last time an incumbent president said he's going to run to the Supreme Court even before results are announced?
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
So that usually, again, is an African context of somebody in the opposition saying the votes are already rigged. Yeah. But I think Donald Trump is from Bamako.
That's an insult to people from Bamako.
No, but the hyperbole is really it's on purpose. Yeah. It's on purpose to imply that we live in unprecedented times. I said this on the Square a few months ago. If Rwanda was going through an election period, it would have been a very interesting time. When any leader's position is challenged, or any leadership's position is challenged, or any political party's leadership is challenged, there will always be compromise. It's extremely important to look at the elections that are happening today in context of COVID-19.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
It can't be separated.
Yeah.
We're coming to the close of the show, but you wanted to say you disagreed with Charles on
Yes.
something. I mean, it's rare that you two ever agree to kick off here.
No, I just feel that quite often, actually, they forget about the current U.S. president. I think in the African context, if you look at why the opposition will always cry before the results are out, it's because the process leading to the election is fundamentally problematic, So, of course, that affects the credibility of the outcome, which is not the case in the U.S., as far as I know. If you look at their system around voter verification, even the votes, because before the final winner is announced, actually an audit is done across all states of the results. So it's not that you just have the results come in and it ends there. No, they actually do an audit. Now, in the African context, we haven't seen an audit. That's one, but also because the process leading to the final election day is not. It's problematic. It's unfair. It's difficult to trust the outcome, So we still have room to improve the process, and again have the institutions that can deal with whatever challenges that come out of this process. Because quite often what we see also is, again, even when some of the opposition figures will be headed to court, they still don't feel the court will be independent or is independent. Yeah. So I think as a way forward, we still have a long way to go in terms of building strong, credible institutions that citizens really feel confident that will address and listen to them, and not just listen to the appointing authority. Yeah.
We've come to the end of the show. I just want quick remarks, closing remarks from you, Charles, on what we've discussed, whether you want to conclude on elections or you want to conclude on the educational system, and then Berna. We have less than a minute, so very quickly, Charles.
I'm probably stay awake tonight. Not that I really care, but just out of curiosity, I don't want to be told that.
You want to be told about the results.
Yeah,
you want to see them.
I really don't care who the next American president, but I just want to know firsthand. That's number one. Number two is I really hope we can fix our education. It's not that I don't have very concrete examples in terms of how it can work, but I think one of the things is for government to give it a top priority and invest in the right areas. Teachers, and their welfare and everything. And it just reminds me, and just in my conclusive remarks, that Bana said, in terms of prioritizing, my favorite institution, my favorite sector in Rwanda is the security sector.
I know you have said this multiple times on the show.
And I will sing it and rhyme it forever.
Yes.
We train, equip,
and retain
our officers and men of the army and police extremely well. And it has rewarded us.
Why can't we do the same?
Why can't we do the same for across the other sectors? Yes.
Noted, Charles. Brenna, very quickly, less than a minute.
Especially education sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think we really need to prioritize education. Yeah. It's a song, we all know we have problems with the education system. We know, and yet we know also we can't do without a functioning education system. So whatever it takes, I think it will have to take some radical measures to actually overhaul the system and really get to the bottom of what the issues are. But most importantly, I think when people are appointed, sometimes they need the time to actually implement their ideas, because it takes time to again see results. But if the process is transparent and everybody is aware why reforms are happening and this is where we are headed, then I think it helps build the patience, and also people are sure that, yes, probably we're headed in the right direction. Yeah, but I feel that we really need to get the education sector fixed and get it right.
Thank you very much. There's definitely no silver bullet on some of these key topics we talked about, but thank you for your insights. Charles, always great to have you. Brenna, thank you for coming today on the show. To our viewers, thank you for tuning in. Keep the conversation going using hashtag #TheSquareRW. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night and see you again next week.
RBA app is here. How'd you get it? It is easier than ever. Go on your home screen. Press Play Store or App Store. Type RBA. Search. There you go. You have RBA app. You have all RBA radios, news, business news,